Princess Elira was born beneath the blood moon, and from the moment her first cry echoed through the royal chambers, the midwives whispered uneasily. Her eyes, unlike any child's, shimmered with a pale silver hue, as if reflecting things that were not there. They called it a blessing at first, a gift from the moon goddess herself. But when the child began to speak truths she could not have known, truths about court plots, hidden sins and unspoken fears, the royal court grew fearful. At age 3, she told her mother the name of the servant who had been poisoning her tea. The queen survived, but her face went pale every time she looked at Elira afterward. At age 5, she pointed to a nobleman during a feast and spoke, "He wears another face in his heart." The man fled the kingdom that night, and weeks later, letters surfaced confirming he was a spy from the south. King Thorian, proud and obsessed with control, grew more distant with each passing year. He called her cursed, his smile tight, his voice always edged with warning. He feared what she saw in him. When Elira was 10, the final incident occurred. She interrupted a royal council meeting, eyes wide, and spoke in a soft voice, "If you trust him, the kingdom will burn." She pointed at the king's trusted war advisor, Lord Remus. That same night, soldiers caught Lord Remus attempting to flee the palace with secret scrolls bearing Ardane's battle formations. Instead of gratitude, the king felt threatened. A daughter who could see hidden truths was not a blessing, she was a liability. A prophecy lingered in the kingdom's memory. Asterisk, the sight that walks will judge the throne. The eyes that whisper shall shatter crowns. Asterisk. At dawn the next day, King Thorian issued a public decree. Princess Elira had succumbed to a rare illness and passed peacefully in her sleep. In truth, he ordered her locked away in the North Tower, a cold, ancient structure abandoned for decades, its walls thick with forgotten spells and echoing silence. The guards were ordered never to speak her name again. Her existence was erased from records. Her portrait removed from every hallway. Elira did not cry when they locked her away. Her eyes simply followed the shadows that trailed the guards' heels. She whispered to the walls and they whispered back. Days turned to months and months to years. She grew up without sunlight on her skin, with only flickering candlelight and the cold breath of stone. But she did not fall into despair. The whispering sight, once a gift she could not control, grew sharper. The walls murmured truths to her. The wind carried secrets from the palace below. She learned to listen, not just with ears but with her whole being. She discovered old runes etched into the tower floor, hidden beneath layers of grime. Her fingers traced them nightly, unlocking fragments of memories stored within the stone. She learned of kings who once ruled with honor, of betrayals buried in centuries, of a door that once opened not with a key but with truth. On stormy nights she spoke with the lightning. When the rain hit the windows, she heard the sadness of the people beyond the tower, their struggles, their hunger, their doubts about the king. She whispered names and the air would respond. Sometimes, the shadows would linger longer in her room, gathering near when she recited truths aloud. She began to change. Her hair grew long and pale, strands shimmering like threads of moonlight. Her skin, once warm and flushed with youth, took on a calm porcelain hue. But it was her eyes that changed the most. They no longer reflected silver, they glowed faintly in the dark, not with light but with awareness. Unseen by the world, she became a part of the tower. A legend to the stones, a mystery to the wind. One night, years after her imprisonment, a guard posted below the tower claimed he heard humming from the top window. A melody, sweet and haunting. He told no one, but he returned the next night and the next, bringing pieces of bread and placing them on the cold step. Each morning the bread would be gone. Elira never saw him. But she knew his name, Baron. She heard him speak to the wind about his sick mother. She heard him whisper regrets for the role he played in her captivity. So she sent him small signs, a feather dropped at his feet with no bird in sight, his mother's pain easing after he left a rose on the tower steps. He started calling her the ghost of truth. In time, whispers about the ghost spread through the palace. Some said it was the spirit of a long-dead princess. Others claimed it was a forgotten goddess imprisoned in the old stone. A few began to question, why was the North Tower sealed when nothing dangerous was said to live there? King Thorian aged quickly. His sleep was restless. He dreamt of Elira, not as a child but as a woman standing in the throne room, her eyes gleaming, her hand reaching for the crown. He ordered the tower reinforced. But when masons arrived, they found their tools blunted. Ropes snapped. One fell and claimed the wind screamed, "She listens." Inside the tower, Elira sat cross-legged in silence. She had stopped counting the years. She no longer feared the outside. She was not waiting to be rescued. She was waiting for the door to remember. One morning, as sunlight struck the tower just right, the first light it had caught in decades, the stones beneath her feet trembled. She stood. A low hum filled the chamber, like voices returning to a long-lost home. The old runes on the floor pulsed. The chains on the outside of her door, rusted and long forgotten, broke away with a groan that echoed across the grounds. The door, locked since her childhood, creaked open on its own. No key. No hand. Only the truth, whispered for years, now spoken aloud by the very walls that had once held her. She stepped out barefoot, robes flowing like mist, and walked past stunned guards who fell to their knees without understanding why. Her presence was not royal, it was elemental. A force of stillness and clarity. The air around her shimmered faintly. She said nothing. Her eyes said everything. By nightfall, rumors of the living ghost reached the court. The king summoned his council, heart pounding. And in his mirror, for the briefest moment, he did not see himself. He saw Elira standing behind him, eyes burning softly, lips unmoving but whispering his guilt. The people remembered. The court remembered. And soon so would the throne. In the earliest days of her confinement, Elira believed the door could be broken with strength or time. She struck it with her fists until her knuckles bled, screamed until her throat went raw. But the door didn't move. It didn't even echo. It stood silently, as though it did not care if she was alive behind it or not. Years passed and she stopped treating it like a door. It was not made of wood or stone or anything she recognized. Smooth, cold, and seamless, the surface bore no handle, no keyhole, no sign of a hinge. But there was a symbol, ancient, etched directly at its center. A single rune. At first she believed it was decoration, an old crest from a forgotten family. But on nights when the moon was full and her dreams were vivid, the rune pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat under skin. She tried tracing it with her fingers, her breath, her voice. She whispered stories into it, sang lullabies the queen used to hum before the fear set in. Nothing ever happened while she was awake. But in sleep, something stirred. The dreams were never the same, but the feeling always was. She was floating. Sometimes above her kingdom, watching fires in the distance. Sometimes deep beneath the palace, where roots twisted like serpents and voices echoed like water in caves. The dreams were neither nightmares nor comforts. They were memories that didn't belong to her. Visions buried in the land itself. And always, the rune glowed gently in the corner of her mind. One night, the tower itself breathed. She woke with a gasp, heart racing, the air charged like before a storm. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Her candle had blown out without wind. She sat up tense. The stone floor beneath her bare feet pulsed once, like something living beneath the foundation had shifted in its sleep. She placed her hand flat against the cold floor and waited. Then she heard it. A whisper, not outside, not within, but around her. When the kingdom forgets its truth, the tower will open. The voice was neither male nor female. It was old. So old that Elira felt her bones ache just hearing it. She rushed to the door, pressing both palms against the rune. It was cool, lifeless. She waited. Hours passed. But the tower didn't move again. What truth had the kingdom forgotten? It haunted her. She began to question every moment of her past. Her mother's silence, the king's betrayal, the way her name was never spoken again beyond these walls. She began to suspect that her imprisonment had less to do with power and more to do with memory, not hers but the kingdom's. In the days that followed, she no longer tried to escape. Instead, she observed. She whispered to the cracks in the wall, to the stone that remembered. She asked questions aloud, testing them like keys. Who built this tower? What was here before the throne? Why do you wait with me? Some nights the rune flickered. Once she sang an old lullaby in a forgotten dialect, and the door shimmered faintly, almost like light passing over water. Still it never opened. Elira began to believe the tower was not her prison. It was her protection. Or worse, a warning to the world outside. A seal. Something that held not her, but what she knew. And still the phrase returned, when the kingdom forgets its truth. But what was truth in a kingdom where lies were written in the laws? Where a princess could be declared dead and erased from history? Where voices were punished and memory was molded by fear? One afternoon, while meditating beneath the tower's narrow window, she saw a bird, small with copper feathers and a bent wing. It crashed into the stone ledge and rolled, flapping helplessly. She cradled it gently, whispering soothing sounds, but the wing was broken. She tore a strip of cloth from her sleeve and bandaged it. For hours she hummed to it, stroking its tiny head. At dusk it chirped once, high and strange. The rune on the door flared suddenly with red light. then went dark. She stood quickly, the bird still in her hands. The tower did not shake. No voice came. But the reaction was clear. An act of mercy, an act of quiet healing. Something had shifted. The bird stayed with her 3 days. On the 4th morning, it flew out the window and vanished into the mist. Alira smiled as it disappeared. But the smile faded when she turned and saw the rune glowing again, this time faintly blue. She pressed her palm to it, whispering, "I saw the bird and I let it go." The rune pulsed once beneath her hand. Warm. Then cold. That night, she dreamed again, not of visions but of a great stone gate deep beneath the castle. A gate not unlike her own door, buried in earth, sealed with the same rune. A child's voice whispered in her dream, "One seal guards memory. One guards flame. One guards you." When she awoke, she began to understand. The tower wasn't built to hold a girl. It was built to hold remembrance. Her body was the vessel, but her sight, her ability to see hidden truths, buried betrayals, forgotten sins, that was what the kingdom feared. That was what the king tried to kill when he pronounced her dead. But he failed. And as long as she lived, so did the truth. The door would open not with force, not with a key, but when the world beyond it remembered what it had chosen to forget. And until that day the tower would breathe, the rune would glow, and Alira would wait, not as a prisoner but as the kingdom's most sacred secret. Bro. In the grand halls of the palace, Queen Maldra wore perfection like a second skin. Her gown shimmered like starlight, her voice rang like a well-tuned harp, and her smile held the weight of honeyed poison. She was the image of grace, loyalty, and charm to the court, but beneath the polished exterior lay a history soaked in betrayal and smoke. Before she became Queen of Eldralore, Maldra was known among the shadowed circles as a seer of considerable power. Not the soft, temple-bound kind who whispered fortune for coins, but a rare reader of deep visions. Dreams that showed not only what was, but what could be shaped through fear and deception. She had sold her knowledge to enemies of the kingdom during the early border wars, offering troop movements, names of spies, and secret maps in exchange for wealth and safety. And it had worked. Her identity remained hidden, her hands unstained by the blood her prophecies helped spill. But there had been one witness to her treachery. One child. One girl with wide eyes and the cursed gift of the whispering sight. Princess Alira. The girl had only been 8 at the time, quietly trailing through the castle's forgotten corridors while the war raged in the east. She had passed by Maldra's chambers and paused, drawn by a whisper that no ordinary ears could hear. Alira had seen the shadows shifting behind the door, the way Maldra knelt not in prayer but in communication. Her hands etched with flame-shaped runes, her breath thick with prophecy, speaking names that belonged to traitors and enemies alike. She had seen it. Every truth. Every treason. And Alira, in her innocence, had spoken the vision aloud to her nursemaid that night. A simple child's statement, overheard by a spy loyal to Maldra. That was the moment the queen had decided. The child must disappear. It didn't take long. King Thorian, a man proud but paranoid, had already begun to fear Alira's unnatural abilities. Maldra played her role perfectly, tearful, trembling, her voice laced with dread. She spoke of omens, of cursed eyes and a dark force rising in Alira's soul. She whispered that the child's power would undo the kingdom, tear the crown from Thorian's brow, and bathe Eldralore in ruin. He had resisted at first, but Maldra was relentless. And soon, Alira was locked away in the North Tower, the official story written in ink and lies. The princess had fallen ill and died quietly in her sleep. But lies have strange echoes. Though no one dared speak of Princess Alira openly, rumors endured like moss in the cracks of stone. The servants talked in hushed tones when they changed sheets or scrubbed the queen's marble floors. They said the tower was cursed, that the wind carried whispers at night. Some claimed to hear footsteps above them, though the tower was sealed. But it wasn't until the birds began to sing that fear truly returned. It started subtly. Just before dawn, a flock of ravens would gather on the tower's edge. No one knew why. Ravens were rare in the capital. They belonged to the highlands or the shadowed forests beyond the kingdom's borders. Yet they came without fail, every morning. And they sang. 3 notes. Always 3. A short, high-pitched trill, followed by a deeper, echoing hum, and a third that warbled like a sorrowful wail. It was unnatural, eerie, and always in 3s. The castle staff began to avoid the tower entirely, crossing themselves whenever they passed too close. Children born to the servants would cry without cause if brought near its base. Dogs would growl. Horses would refuse to approach the courtyard beneath it. The queen dismissed the talk as superstition. "Birds sing," she said coldly. Let them. Better that than the sound of plotting tongues. But she was not so calm behind closed doors. In the privacy of her chambers she clawed through old tomes, searching for signs and counterspells. She questioned her personal seer, demanded answers from her spies, and even hired a whisperman from the Eastern Isles, a rogue truth-teller who could taste lies in the air. But none could explain the birds, nor the sudden chill that had begun to creep into the palace halls. Worse still were her dreams. Night after night, Queen Maldra found herself walking barefoot down the palace corridors, the marble cold and slick beneath her feet. At the end of the hallway always stood a girl with white eyes, hair like falling ash, and a voice that whispered things Maldra refused to remember. Each time she reached for the child, her hands burned. Not with fire, but with the weight of all the truths she had twisted. And still she kept smiling by day. She made certain the king remained convinced that Elira had been a danger to them both. "Your Majesty," she would say gently as they sat by the fire, "sometimes you see the girl's eyes in our daughter, don't you? But don't worry. I will keep this kingdom safe, even from ghosts." Thorian, old and weary, would nod. He had grown too tired for doubt. But Maldra was not tired. She was afraid. For deep in her gut, the same place that once birthed prophecies now churned with a terrible certainty. She had not silenced Elira. Not truly. The birds, the wind, the whispers, they were signs. The tower had not sealed her away. It had protected her, contained her, preserved something ancient, something still watching. And worse, the queen began to wonder if the girl had ever needed a key to escape at all. "You're ready for part 4. Elira sat at the narrow window ledge of the north tower, her fingers curled around the cold stone as she listened to the sighing wind. For years, it had been her only companion, whistling through the cracks of the ancient walls, murmuring like a voice on the edge of waking. She used to think she imagined it, but now she knew better. The wind carried more than sound. It carried secrets. At first they came as fragments. A broken name caught in a breeze. A sob pressed against her ear like a memory not her own. A heated argument echoing across impossible distances, words spoken in kitchens and throne rooms and forests far beyond the tower's reach. They came to her like threads and Elira began to weave them. One day as the moon hung low and red on the horizon, she heard a woman scream a name, Tyrion, followed by the clash of steel. She knew then that Tyrion, the captain of the outer guard, had betrayed the crown. 2 days later she heard soldiers talking below, confirming his arrest. She hadn't seen it, but she had known. The truth traveled not by sight or speech, but by whisper. The gift she was born with, the one her father had feared, was growing. With it came a deep loneliness. She had no mirror, no one to tell her how she looked. Her hair was longer now, tangled in waves like black smoke. Her gown had been patched and repatched from curtain scraps she'd stitched herself. Her eyes, she imagined, still glowed silver in the dark, the color that had terrified the queen so long ago. And her voice, unused for years except in murmured thoughts, now found a strange, growing boldness. So she started speaking to the wind. At first she whispered names she remembered from childhood. Her old tutor, her mother's maid, a stable boy who had once given her an apple when she was 5. Then she began asking questions. "Does anyone remember me? Do they know I live? Do they still fear the truth?" And one day the wind answered. It wasn't the voice of ghosts or magic. It was human. "Young. Mel." "Who said that?" the voice asked, hushed but clear. "Is someone there?" Elira's breath caught. For a moment she was silent, heart racing with a sudden fear. Had she imagined it? Was madness now the price of truth? She leaned closer to the window, her lips parting. "Can you hear me?" Pause. The wind stirred again. "Yes," came the voice. "But this tower's empty. No one's been here for years. I thought it was haunted." Elira closed her eyes. Her fingers trembled against the stone. "Then perhaps I am a ghost," she whispered. "Or perhaps I was simply forgotten." The boy didn't respond for a long time. When he did, it was softer. "What's your name?" "Elira." A sharp intake of breath. "That's the name of the princess. But she died. Years ago." Elira felt something shift inside her. The truth still walked in the world but wrapped in lies like chains. She chose her next words carefully. "Then perhaps not all deaths are real. And not all truths stay buried." Silence followed, thick and unsure. But then the boy spoke again. "My name's Joran. I work in the stables. Feed the war horses. Clean up their muck. My mother's a kitchen maid." Elira smiled, her first real smile in years. "A horse tender and a ghost. That sounds like the beginning of a tale." From that night on, Joran returned every evening. He would walk near the tower courtyard, pretending to sweep or search for lost tools. Whenever no one was near, he'd speak softly to the wind, to her, asking questions, sharing stories. He told her of the city's markets, the mood of the soldiers, the whispers in the halls. He spoke of Queen Maldra's temper and the growing unease among the palace staff. Of how, sometimes, birds would gather on the tower at dawn, singing in threes, and how the queen had ordered their nests destroyed only for more to come. Alira in turn shared what the walls told her, what the whispers revealed. She warned Joran of a man in the kitchens who stole wine and blamed the staff. She told him which guard beat the stable boys when no one watched. And she taught him how to listen, not with his ears but with silence. Still your breath, she would say. Feel the space between each sound. That's where the truth hides. Joran listened, and he began to believe. One night, as frost crept over the windows, Joran said, "You don't sound mad. You sound like a queen." Alira felt the words like a pulse. She had never ruled, never sat on a throne. But in that moment she realized something powerful. Even locked away, her voice moved beyond these walls. Her truth, long denied, had found a path back to the world. The next day, a servant was overheard humming a strange tune, 3 notes in a haunting rhythm, the same sung by the birds at dawn. A melody not taught, not learned, only remembered. The castle was changing, slowly but surely. And Alira, from her tower without doors or locks, was at the center of it all, whisper by whisper, wind by wind. With Part 5. Joran had never believed in fate. Life to him was simple: muck the stalls, polish the saddles, keep his head down. But since he'd begun speaking with the girl in the tower, the world no longer felt so simple. Every word Alira whispered through the wind unraveled another thread of the kingdom's secrets. And every night, Joran felt less like a stable boy and more like someone standing at the edge of something vast. He couldn't see her, but her voice stayed with him, calm, haunting, strong. When he closed his eyes, he imagined her standing at the window in silver moonlight, cloaked in the weight of truth and sorrow. She wasn't a ghost. She was real. And she was alone. The thought gnawed at him. So he found a way to do more. There was a hawk, sharp-eyed and clever, that often perched on the castle stables. The other boys called it cursed because it never nested, it only watched as if waiting. But Alira once had told Joran something strange. "There's a hawk that circles the tower," she said. "It listens." So Joran began training the hawk in secret, tempting it with scraps and speaking gently as it ate from his hand. He named her Lyra, after the princess who should have ruled. It took weeks, but eventually, Lyra would let him tie small bundles to her leg. The first time he did it, his hands shook. Inside the bundle was a piece of bread and a folded scrap of parchment. On it he had written, "You don't have to be alone. Not anymore." That night, as the hawk soared above the tower, Alira reached out and untied the note with shaking fingers. She hadn't touched a message from the outside world in years. When she opened it and read the words, something inside her cracked, not in pain but in relief. The next morning, Joran returned to the stables and found Lyra waiting, a torn strip of silk tied around her leg. In delicate handwriting it read, "I never was. I had the wind. But thank you." From then on they exchanged more than words. Joran sent her fruit, torn pages from old books, and even charcoal for writing. Alira returned her thoughts, dreams scribbled on cloth, sketches of symbols she saw glowing in the tower's rune, and once, a feather dipped in gold, warm to the touch. Their bond grew deeper with every passing day. And still they remained cautious. Queen Maldra's reach stretched far, and even whispers could turn to shackles. But one night changed everything. It was late and the air was heavy with fog. Joran, restless, had asked Lyra to fly one more time. Alira, waiting at the window, heard her before she saw her, the soft flap of wings, a shadow against the moon. When she unwrapped the latest note, she smiled. Joran had asked, "Did your mother ever sing to you?" Alira sat on the edge of her bed and stared into the candlelight. Yes. Her mother had sung to her, a lullaby with no words, only sounds. It was a song passed through blood, not tongues. A melody meant to stir the heart of the land. She began to hum it, her voice soft and trembling. The notes rose like smoke, brushing against stone, slipping into cracks and riding the breeze. The tune was slow, sorrowful and full of longing. She hadn't sung it since the day her mother vanished, taken, they said, by fever. But Alira had always known that was a lie. The queen had come after her. Still she sang. What she didn't know was that far beyond the tower, in the cellars beneath the old mill, a group of cloaked figures sat in candlelight, heads bowed in debate. They were the Silent Council, rebels who remembered the days before Maldra's reign, who whispered of the queen that should have been. As they argued about broken alliances and fading support, a gust of wind crept in through the cracks. And with it came the lullaby. At first they thought it a trick, a breeze playing tricks on tired minds. But one by one their eyes widened. The melody was unmistakable, the song of Queen Aelira, sung only to her child, never recorded, never known beyond blood. The leader of the council, an aging woman named Mara, stood and pressed her hand to her heart. "She lives," she whispered. "By the old gods, the princess lives." The council fell silent. Hope, long dormant, flickered to life. Back in the castle, word spread in subtler ways. Kitchen girls hummed the melody without knowing why. Gardeners found themselves whistling its tune. Even the guards noticed the hawk flying toward the north tower more frequently, circling, returning. Queen Maldra grew restless. She'd heard rumors. A song from the wind. A ghost princess who sang to birds. She ordered the tower sealed tighter, though there were no doors to seal. She demanded the hawk be shot down. But every archer missed. Or perhaps something guided their arrows astray. Aelira kept singing. And now the kingdom began to remember. Not fully. Not yet. But in dreams and lullabies, in the corners of silent conversations, the name Aelira returned like a flame in the dark. Faint, flickering, but growing stronger with each breath of wind. Joran no longer felt like a boy lost in shadows. He had found something greater than truth. He had found purpose. And Aelira, still locked in a tower without keys, felt the stirrings of change deep within the stone. The world was listening again. The next outline. That night, the sky tore itself open. Aelira lay on the stone floor of her tower, asleep but restless, her breath shallow, her fingers twitching with some unknown urgency. In her dreams, she stood in the middle of a burning field. The sky above her was blood-red, stars crashing down like embers from the heavens. Each one whispered a name as it fell, names she did not know but felt buried in her bones. Smoke wrapped around her ankles like shackles. Flames licked at her skin, but she didn't burn. Instead, she glowed, from within, like the heart of a star trying to remember what it was before it was broken. A voice echoed in her chest, low and ancient. "The door does not need a key. It needs you." She jolted awake. For a few seconds she was still caught between dream and waking, breathless, surrounded by dark stone, her skin damp with sweat. The wind outside howled, pressing against the window like a warning. Her hands shook. Something had shifted. She could feel it in the tower itself. The air trembled. The walls felt thinner. Then she saw it. The rune, the one etched into the door that had kept her caged for 12 years, was glowing. But this time it wasn't faint. It wasn't pulsing in quiet rhythm like before. It was searing. Alive. A white-blue light that danced like fire but held none of its warmth. Aelira rose slowly, her bare feet silent on the cold stone. Her heart pounded, not from fear but from recognition. The rune had changed. It no longer looked like a single mark. It shimmered and moved, revealing layers beneath, symbols within symbols, all woven together in a language she had never learned but somehow understood. It spoke of bloodline and betrayal, of silence turned sacred, of truth buried under power. She moved closer, and the air grew warmer, charged like lightning before a storm. She reached out her hand. Her fingers hovered inches away, and the light responded, rising to meet her skin. A sharp, sudden sting pierced her palm, not painful but cleansing, like the prick of a needle before healing can begin. And then the door, solid stone for over a decade, crumbled. Not with thunder. Not with smoke. Just ash. Silent, slow, dignified. The rune burned brighter, and the wall before her dissolved into weightless dust, drifting to the ground like snowfall. In a matter of seconds, the entrance to the north tower no longer existed. Where there had been stone, there was now open air. The way forward. Aelira stood still. The wind that poured through the now open doorway tasted different, clearer, realer. It smelled of wet earth, torch smoke, and lavender. The world. The world she hadn't touched in 12 years. She stepped forward. Each footfall was deliberate, quiet, yet carried a power the walls themselves seemed to remember. The stone floor didn't creak. The tower didn't groan. Even the wind held its breath as she moved. Her long silver-white hair, grown wild and uncut, swept behind her like a veil. Her skin was pale but not sickly. Her eyes glowed faintly, silver halos within shadowed irises, the mark of the whispering sight, once feared, now reborn. The hallway outside the tower was deserted. Dust lay thick across the floor and spiderwebs bridged ancient tapestries. No one had dared enter this wing for over a decade. Queen Maldra had declared it cursed. Servants whispered that spirits wandered its halls. In truth, only Elira had. She walked without pause. The silence seemed to part for her. The candles that lined the walls flickered into flame as she passed, though no match touched them. The paintings on the walls, portraits of kings and queens long gone, seemed to shift slightly as if bowing their heads. Even the stones under her feet warmed faintly at her step. Everything remembered her. Everything. And yet no one else did. In the great halls below, the castle bustled with noise and ignorance. Courtiers laughed. Servants rushed. Queen Maldra prepared for another banquet, one celebrating the triumph of order over chaos. Her code for stamping out old bloodlines. King Thorian, dulled by years of guilt and poison-laced wine, stared into goblets, too lost to remember the daughter he once kissed goodnight. Elira's approach was silent, unseen. A whisper in the heart of stone. But not for long. As she reached the eastern stairwell, voices echoed upward. Two guards, armor clinking, chatting casually, completely unaware of the shift above. Thought the queen was mad to lock that tower up. No one even remembers who lived there. Elira, wasn't it? The daughter? Died of fever, they said. Or worse. Some say she was cursed. She's dead either way. Been over 10 years. Elira stepped into view. The guards froze. One dropped his torch. The other drew his sword instinctively, though his hands shook violently. She didn't flinch. She only looked at them calmly as if remembering who they were, stable-born, once kind boys, now molded by fear and orders. They stared at her like she was a ghost. But she was not dead. Not broken. Not gone. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but unmistakable. The truth was not buried deep enough. Neither man moved. She passed them without resistance. They turned to follow, but their knees buckled. Not from any spell, but from the sheer weight of memory crashing back into them like a wave. Elira walked on. Down into the heart of the castle. Through halls where her laughter once echoed. Past the courtyard where she used to run barefoot beneath the moon. Toward the throne room, the place where her mother had once stood tall beside a king who was still whole. When she pushed open the grand doors, the room fell silent. 100 faces turned. Queen Maldra's eyes widened, not in recognition but in disbelief. She rose from her seat slowly, her mouth curling into a forced smile. Who dares? But the words died in her throat. The queen knew. Deep down in the cold part of her heart that feared the wind and the songs sung by birds, she knew. Elira stepped forward. Light filtered through the stained glass windows, catching on her silver eyes. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the weight of years. I am Elira, daughter of Elira, firstborn of Thorian. I was locked away. I was forgotten. But the truth does not rot. It waits. Murmurs rose from the nobles. Some gasped. Others fell to their knees without knowing why. The king, slumped on his throne, looked up slowly. His wine cup slipped from his fingers. He stared at her with bleary eyes, blinking as if waking from a long sleep. Elira, he whispered. And in that moment, the kingdom remembered. The rune had never been a lock. The tower was never a prison. It was a promise. A waiting place. A chamber of truth sealed until the lies around it collapsed under their own weight. And now the door had opened. Because truth had a voice again. And she had never been silent. Only unheard. Elira moved like shadow through the lower halls, unnoticed by most, unrecognized by many. The court still reeled from her appearance in the throne room. Whispers echoed in every corridor, chambermaids dropped trays, guards hesitated at their posts. But the queen had not yet struck, and Elira had no time to waste. The castle had changed in her absence, grown colder, more gilded. But underneath the new gold leaf and red banners of Maldra's reign, the bones of the old palace remained, and Elira knew those bones well. She made her way to the north gate stables under moonlight, where the path turned to shadow and moss. She waited in silence beside the old hawk perch, watching the birds above rustle restlessly, sensing her return. And then a soft rustle. A creak. The sound of boots on straw. Is it really you? The voice broke through the stillness like warm light through ice. Joran stood at the edge of the stable, half shrouded in moonlight, eyes wide, one hand still gripping the half door as if unsure whether to run or fall to his knees. It is, Elira said quietly. He approached slowly. He was taller now, more weathered than the boy who had once answered the whispers of a forgotten princess. but his eyes still held the same stubborn gentleness. "I thought maybe it was a trick," he said. "A test. Or a ghost," some of the others said. She stepped forward and his words died. He took her hands in his and felt the warmth, the pulse, the reality of her. "You're not a ghost," he breathed. "No," she said. "I was forgotten. But I never died." A silence passed between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of all the things they never got to say. Of all the quiet hope that had pulsed between hawk feathers and parchment. Of a friendship that had survived time and silence and stone. "I need to show you something," Joran said finally. "Something the queen doesn't know I found." They moved through the stable, then slipped through a loose stone near the grain bins. Behind it, a tunnel wound into darkness, narrow, damp, and breathing with the smell of old earth. Torches lined the passage, unlit but ready. Joran struck one, and the walls came alive with flickering gold. "This tunnel leads to the old council chambers," he explained. "The queen had them sealed after your mother died. Said they were full of bad spirits. But it's not spirits she feared." As they walked, Elira saw the truth. Rooms with abandoned scrolls. Shelves filled with old maps showing the kingdom before the borders were redrawn. Banners with her mother's crest, a silver flame surrounded by stars, tucked away behind newer insignias. One chamber held a rotting portrait covered in black cloth. Joran pulled the cloth away and Elira gasped. It was her. At age 5. Standing between her mother and father. Her mother's eyes were clear and bright, her hands resting gently on Elira's shoulders. Her father's smile had not yet faded into wine and forgetfulness. "I found this 2 years ago," Joran whispered. "I didn't know who she was, not for sure. But then I heard your lullaby. And I saw the eyes. The same silver." Elira stepped closer. Her fingers brushed the painting's edge. Behind it, faint outlines of other canvases peeked through, more portraits hidden behind false kings and counterfeit queens. Her face appeared again and again, always younger, always smiling, always buried beneath layers of Maldra's deception. The kingdom had forgotten. But the castle hadn't. Even stone remembers. Why hide them? Elira asked, though the answer weighed heavy on her already. "Because if they saw you," Joran replied, "they'd remember who was supposed to be queen." He led her further down the tunnel, to a narrow stone staircase that wound up and up, finally emerging near the southern wing, close to the royal chambers. They moved like ghosts through the servant halls, passing unlit sconces and sleeping guards. In the king's bedchamber, the once mighty Thorian lay still beneath heavy velvet sheets. His beard was long and gray now, his frame shrunken. The air smelled of herbs and silence. Elira stood at the threshold, unwilling to step closer. "He barely speaks anymore," Joran murmured. "Maldra keeps him drugged. Says he has spells. But I think he's trying to forget." Elira watched her father's chest rise and fall. Once this man had swung her in his arms, called her his starlight. Once he had ruled with clarity and care. Now he looked barely alive. She stepped closer and sat beside him, brushing a loose strand of hair from his forehead. "Do you remember me?" she whispered. His eyes fluttered. For a moment nothing. Then a flicker. The barest trace of recognition. His lips parted, dry and cracked. "Elira?" he rasped. She took his hand. "Yes, I'm here." A tear slid down the king's cheek. Joran watched from the shadows, silent. Later that night, they retreated once more into the hidden corridors. Word was spreading like wildfire. Servants had seen her. Stable hands had sworn the wind carried her name. And in the silent hours before dawn, something strange began to happen. Tapestries fell. Paintings reappeared. In the hall of portraits, a little girl knocked over a false panel, and beneath it, a painting of Elira as a child, riding a silver-winged horse, was revealed. Nobles wandered the lower halls and gasped to find new faces staring at them from old frames. The palace was remembering her piece by piece. And the people too began to murmur. The silver-eyed girl had returned. The princess of stars. The daughter of flame. Elira. Not dead. Not cursed. Not forgotten. But alive. And watching. You're ready for part 8. The grand court sparkled under chandeliers of crystal flame, each light dancing across gilded walls and marble floors. Trumpets sang a triumphant tune as nobles in silk and velvet raised goblets of golden wine. Tonight was Queen Maldra's celebration, her 10-year reign as sovereign beside the fading King Thorian. Servants moved swiftly between dancers. The queen stood at the dais, radiant in deep crimson robes. Her crown glimmered under the firelight, but her eyes darted often to the side, never resting, always watching. as if even she sensed that the stones beneath her feet were no longer hers to command. A wind stirred, soft at first, barely noticed. Then it circled through the chamber like a forgotten song, unsettling the flames, whispering across cloaks and curls. And then, silence. Not a commanded silence, but one that fell naturally, suddenly, as if the air had thickened. Every torch dimmed. The music froze. The very shadows turned inward. And at the center of the court, where none had seen her enter, stood a figure cloaked in silver mist and drifting shadow. No door had opened. No trumpet had heralded. But there she was. Alira. Older now. Wiser. Regal in stillness. Her eyes glowed faintly, like starlight hidden in deep water. Gasps scattered through the court. "Who dares?" one noble began, but his voice broke as Alira lifted her hood. "I am the daughter of Queen Honora," she said, her voice ringing like a bell cast from truth itself. "I am Alira of the Flame, rightful heir of the Star Crest. And I was never dead." The hall erupted in noise, half awe, half fear. Nobles stumbled backward. Some cried. Others bowed instinctively, unsure why they did, only that the very air had shifted to recognize her. Queen Maldra stood frozen on the dais, her face a masterwork of trained disbelief. "This is sorcery," Maldra said coldly. "A trick. An impostor summoned by rebels. Guards." But the guards did not move. Alira raised her hand. "You may silence tongues," she said, "but not truth." And then she spoke names. Secrets spilled from her lips like molten gold. Whispered alliances. Poisoned goblets. Councils held in the dark. The identities of spies bought with silver and blood. "I was locked in a tower with no door," she said, "but I saw. The wind carried your sins to me. The walls breathed your lies into my dreams." Maldra's voice cracked. "This is treason." "No," Alira said calmly. "This is reckoning." She stepped forward, the mist parting before her, not as illusion but memory. Every footstep echoed like thunder on sacred ground. "You told the king I was cursed. You told the people my mother was mad. You paid seers to cloud the stars, and you rewrote prophecy in your favor." From her cloak she drew a scroll. "This was my mother's last decree. Hidden beneath your gilded floorboards. A declaration naming me her heir, sealed with her blood. You buried it beneath a new throne, your throne." Gasps again. Several nobles backed away from Maldra's dais. Whispers spread like fire in dry grass. Alira's voice rose. "You used my father's grief. You weakened him with poison masked as healing. You said I died in fire, but it was your flame that burned our name." Queen Maldra's composure shattered. "You were a child," she screamed. "You would have destroyed everything your mother built." "I am what my mother built," Alira said, her voice low. "And you are what she feared." Then from the side of the room a murmur, and an elderly man emerged. The king. Weak, barely standing, supported by two servants, but awake, eyes wide, fixed on the girl before him. "Alira," he whispered. The court froze. He took a shaking step forward. Then another. I remember." Maldra stepped down from the dais. "My king, she's lying. She's dangerous. Let me protect." But Thorian raised a trembling hand. "No," he said. You told me she was dead. That the flames took her." He turned to Alira, tears glimmering in his faded eyes. "I held your doll in the ash. I wept for you. And still you crowned her," Alira replied softly. "But it's not too late." The king fell to his knees. "I was blind," he whispered. "Forgive me." Alira walked to him and placed her hand over his heart. "If you remember me, then remember what it meant to be king." Behind her the court stirred. Nobles knelt one by one. Some in guilt, some in awe, but all in recognition. Maldra looked around wildly. No. I built this kingdom. I gave it strength. I ruled." "You ruled on a throne built from lies," Alira said, turning to her. "And lies," she added, "have no crown." At that moment the crown atop Maldra's head cracked, a fine hairline fracture that shimmered across the surface. It was not magic. It was memory. The kind that could shatter empires. She reached up, trembling, and touched it. It broke in half in her hands. Gasps rippled like thunder. Alira stepped forward. Not to punish. Not to scream. But to claim. She turned to the people. To the hall. To the world that had tried to forget her. "I have returned," she said. "Not for vengeance. Not for fear. But for truth." She knelt before the throne. Not the gilded seat of lies, but the one beside it, older, dust-covered, once belonging to Queen Honora. With slow hands she cleaned it, and sat. The room bowed. And outside, 3 birds sang beneath the window, just like they always had.